I want to try something. I'm going to say shalom, and I want to invite folks to come off mute and say Yah. Okay. So shalom,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
shalom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Shalom, l'kula, shalom, l'kulam. Thank you so much, Rabbi Toba, for inviting me to share with you all today. You honor me by even suggesting that I can be your teacher as well. But so good to be able to share with the community here. I I'll share a little bit about myself, but I want to explain that introduction. That is a Igbo, really, traditionally it's Igbo Kwenu, which is Igbo Kwenu in Igbo language is hail. And the response is "yeah" that the community gives. And this is something that is said to kind of get the consent from the community to be able to speak, to be able to share, both as a way as greeting, but as a way as of welcoming, getting that community consent. And the response is "yeah," and many people speculate that it is "yeah" not as a like "haya," but as "yeah" referencing the shorthand of the creator, right? And so when you say Igbo Kwenu, it's like Igbo hail. The response is "yeah." So I took some liberty there to use shalom instead, as does the synagogue community that I was with, the Jewish community I was with in my trip in January. Also adapted have adapted this tradition and use it with shalom as well. So again, I'm Yehudah. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am based these days in Los Angeles, though I've lived for many years in Brooklyn. As Rabbi Tova mentioned, I work at Kirva, which was the Inside Out Wisdom in Action project formerly, where we equip advocates and organizers with the Jewish spiritual wisdom and practice of Musar to be most effective, sustained, and successful in our social justice efforts. But I'm not here today to talk about that work. I'm here today to share about my ancestral roots and Igbo Jewish history, really Hebrew Igbos, and the ways that these ancestral roots are connected to my own journey of teshuvah, of return to Torah-based practice. So I want to start off by saying that first of all, just giving thanks to Yah, to Hashem, for bringing me to this moment and being able to share about my ancestral roots and really dedicating this sharing to both Hashem, but also to the Jewish community in Ogidi that I was with in January, and for their hospitality of welcoming myself and my fiance there as well. I grew up, however, even though I'm sharing about my Igbo ancestral roots, I grew up for the most part in New Jersey. I was born in Guyana. I'll share more about that in a few moments. But I grew up for the most part in New Jersey, and I grew up deeply immersed in the Jewish community there, in the conservative Jewish community. I was in Newark. The synagogue we went to was Oheb Shalom in South Orange, and I was a regular Torah reader there, weekly Torah reader, alongside my father and my Abba and my sister. I was involved in all sorts of Jewish youth group life. This is teenage Yehudah, right? And on the right, you have me at Camp Ramah when I was a counselor there. On the left, actually, is myself as a camp director in my early 20s as I came back to serve the USY movement. I was chapter president growing up, co-chapter president. I went to all the regional events, and then I went on and I actually attended List College. the joint program with JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, and Columbia University, and continued on my Jewish journey, and which actually led me to some of my the work that I do today. In fact, I went on to start, you see in the bottom left, B'nai Mitzvah Campaign, which is a tutoring company that still exists today that prepares unaffiliated Jewish families for their bar mitzvah ceremonies. And we've done a lot of great work. I really deeply invested in bringing the bar mitzvah ceremony preparation into the 21st century. We're using iPads, teaching trope through dance movement, and using various apps. And in any event, you know, we did bar mitzvah ceremonies all across the country. We even did some international ones in Poland and Kenya. I also lived in the Moishe House for many years, which helps to build community for Jews in their 20s and 30s. And all of that was in the mix while I was also rooting in another piece, a very foundational piece of my Jewishness, the piece around justice and our commitment, our responsibility, our obligation to fight for equity and justice within our society, which led me to work with JFREJ, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and to infuse Jewish spiritual ritual, Torah-based practice with the work of organizing and with activism, striving to really morally ground our movements in the highest accountability in the work of making this world a better place and really ridding it of racism and economic exploitation. So I went on to organize various direct actions like 40 Days of Teshuvah, which happened during the uprising where we protested for 40 days in Brooklyn publicly, really infusing Jewish spiritual practice as a way to build our spiritual muscle for the ongoing fight for racial justice. So I'll say here that while that's been my upbringing, right, really steeped and immersed in Jewish community, I'm also now on a journey of deepening my understanding and my ancestral Jewish roots through my Igbo heritage, right? You know, 7 years ago, I was on a trip through the Moishe House, somewhat adjacently through the Moishe House, and we were at the Yafa port in Israel. And the facilitator there asked me, or asked the group really, where does history begin for you as we looked out at the water? And that question at the time deeply disturbed me as I wasn't able to fully answer that question given the historical, cultural, and spiritual erasure that the transatlantic slave trade did for so many of us descendants of enslaved Africans. Now, while my Ima's family, we've known that we're descendants of Igbo, and so now we know as well that we're ancestrally Jewish, we've been disconnected from generations, from our history, from our culture, from our spiritual customs and traditions that really root us in who we are. So I say all of this to say that the reason, for the purpose I'm here today, is to really uplift Hebrew Igbo history as Jewish history, alongside many other African Jewish histories as well. I think it's a very important mission in sharing this knowledge and educating the broader Jewish community so that we can actually recognize and live into the reality of our ethnic and racial diversity, right? The second reason that I share this is to say that I have taken on the responsibility, I felt the responsibility as I was in Igbo land And I was given formally that responsibility to be an ambassador to Jewish communities here in the US. Not as a means to convince anyone who may be skeptical of this history and this truth, but rather to help facilitate connections with those who are really ready to build community, to really recognize the diversity of the Jewish community, the comprehensive wholeness that we are, that is much larger than what white supremacy really allows for, and that whitewashing of history that has happened. So I was born, as I mentioned, in Guyana, where many Igbo, enslaved Igbos were brought through the transatlantic slave trade. And my family had been there for generations, right? My mother and her siblings grew up in Guyana. My grandfather and grandmother were Guyanese. And for generations, going back up until it's about we're estimating my fourth or fifth great grandparent was brought to Guyana as an enslaved person somewhere around the turn of the 19th century. And so Guyana is a beautiful country. Very proud to be from Guyana. It's got one of the best biodiversity, the greatest biodiversity in the world. But it's also a place of a secondary place of exile, if you will, right? And so also holds that painful kind of duality with it as well, right? And so through some research of my own, I found that at very least 7,000 Igbo people were brought to Guyana as enslaved peoples, at least, and I'm sure those numbers are actually low. But I was able to track down the actual ships of enslaved peoples that were brought from what's called the Bight of Biafra, which was in the port, to the coast of Guyana. So before all of this, then the triangle slave trade really started to happen, right? Which you see here depicted on this picture. Igbo people, or really Israelites, have been living in what is today Igbo land for millennia, right? These pictures show like the typical Igbo land. Igbo land is in the southeast, the eastern region of Nigeria, right? Lagos is really on the coast. Lagos is kind of like the New York City of Nigeria. And in the eastern part, which requires another domestic flight from Lagos, you'll find yourself in Igbo land, which is along what is called the Niger, right? And really the country Nigeria is from that. It's like the area of the Niger. That's what the Europeans then renamed that whole area. But it was its own country. Igbo is both a compilation of tribes and really thought of as a nation of people, right? And so I'll share a little bit more about that. And the genocide that had happened to Igbo people in the late 60s, early 70s, because they're really a nation and try to split off to be a nation. But all this to say is that Igbo people lived in Igbo land and prospered there for millennia, right? And that migration, various Igbo people have different understandings, oral histories of when that migration began. I think everybody can agree that a lot of the migration happened starting around the period, at the very least, of King Shlomo in the year 1000 CE, BCE, before the Common Era. As the nation was about to be split into two, there was already prophets prophesying of exile. Some folks were in panic, right? And so over the time, up throughout the time of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, right, you had, as the Israelite nation began to kind of crumble and disintegrate, and there was pressures from outside nations, that you had some Israelites who started to flee south into Egypt. You have evidence of from the Tanakh and also archaeological evidence of Jewish communities setting up some communities for some time in Elephantine, and an island south in the southern area of Egypt. And from there, you had folks migrate further down the Nile River past Elephantine. Some moved east into Ethiopia and maybe joined some of the other Israelites that are already in Ethiopia there. But others also followed the course of the White Nile into more of the Great Lakes region of Africa and beyond, right? Going down the Niger, right? And so the understanding that many Igbo folks have is that the primary, tribe that led this migration was the tribe of God. Now, in the anglicized version, it's read as Gad, but in Hebrew, it's the word is really the tribe God, right? And so you have this understanding that the clan of Eri, which was the fifth son of God, was one of the first Israelite sub tribes to really settle in the southeastern area, which is now Igbo land, right, of Nigeria. You even have, some folks, particularly from that tribe, that can trace that their oldest ancestor that settled in what's today, again, Igbo land in Nigeria, as early as 1087 BCE. And I could show you that the ancestral lineage that this person can trace. I'll get to that a little bit later in this presentation. You'll find even in the Mishnah, right, reference to Jews in Africa, right, or West Africa. You have Mishnah being the oral Torah law, that the Gemara asks, like, where did the exile of the 10 tribes, where did that happen? And you have this response from Mar Zutra. He says that they were exiled to Africa, and Rabbi Hanina says to the Selug Mountains, right? So even within the rabbinical tradition, you have an understanding that actually, yes, there were Israelites in the panic and the chaos of exile who were going all over the place, and many ended up in West Africa. You have records of European Jews even visiting Nigeria, Portuguese and Moroccan Jews who traded in the region of Igbo land. And you have some correspondence that was known by Jewish authorities that happened between leaders in Igbo land, as well with some of these chief rabbis, who always really addressed these letters to the brethren of the children of Israel, right? So Israelites, again, through the course of the exile, following the period of Shlomo, of King Solomon, many ended up in West Africa over the course of multiple migrations. And they continue to live Torah-based spirituality to the best of their ability, as well as assimilating some of the customs from around that they were around, right? And everything from agricultural practice, right? You'll find that Igbo people to this day keep the laws of Shemitah, right? Of letting the land rest every 7 years. And the laws of not picking to the ends and the corners of your field, right? That actually folks can enter into your gate and take what they can carry with them as a way to care for those who are poor and ensure that there's no hungry in the society, right? And you'll find that even some Europeans who came to, when the Portuguese first started to come to what's now Nigeria and engage in the transatlantic slave trade, that they noted that of the tribes around, that the Igbo people, even though some people were poor, nobody was homeless. Nobody was hungry, right? It was different than some of the other tribes around. They even continue to practice, I would, which is, I think, hard for the modern sensibility to understand, Torah-based slavery, right? Where it was very different than chattel slavery, right, which became the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. It was much more like indentured servitude for those. There were no prisons, right? But if you committed a crime, if you did something that you needed to make repair for reparations for, and you couldn't pay that yourself, you would enter into this kind of indentured servitude. And you could see the laws of slavery in the Torah itself. It was interesting. I had a conversation with a professor, Professor Duru, at he's at the University of Lagos, and he shared with me that he asked his father, who practiced traditional Igbo religion, which is parallel to Torah-based spirituality. And he asked his father, in your day or back in the day, how could you tell the difference between an Igbo slave and an Igbo free person, right? Because you couldn't tell from the way they were treated. They were treated well. They had their own homes on the land. And they also were able to keep Shabbat. Everybody rested on the rest day. There was no difference in regards to how folks were treated. But the father came back and he said, who was actually illiterate, he couldn't read for himself. He said, oh, the one way you could tell is because they had a piercing in their ear, right? Which, if you're familiar with the laws around slavery in the Torah, that was the indication that was given, that you should pierce their ear. So in some ways, you can imagine, though, that this engagement in slavery actually helped to pave the way to the chattel slavery that was very destructive to African peoples, including the Igbo nation. Because when the Europeans showed up, the Portuguese particularly, you had Igbos who engaged actually in the slave trade, who sold each other into slavery, but based off of the understanding that slavery was not what it became with the European transatlantic triangle slave trade. It didn't have that level of brutality for the Igbo people, right? So you did have Arochukwu, the Aro nation, that engaged a lot in capturing of Igbo slaves, even though the Yoruba tribe, by and large, was the main in that area they had the main control over the slave trade. And I'll share more about that in Badagry, right? So you'll see here on this slide, this is the point of, this is the area where that enslaved people that were captured were taken to spend 2 to 3 months before being shipped off to the Americas, right? You'll see in the left picture, this is, you had a lot of folks. Let me back up. The Portuguese recognized that of the folks there, Igbo folks were intelligent, hardworking, and they became very desired within the slave trade. Now, that also came with a very rebellious spirit, right? You had in the early days of the slave trade, a lot of Igbos who rebelled, who took over ships, who committed suicide jumping off the ships. And so the Portuguese came to the Yoruba tribe and they said, okay, we're losing money here, right? How do we actually break the spirit? How do we make these enslaved peoples docile? So what we were taught when we went there is that you take a boat from Lagos to get to this point of what's called no return, to the slave port. We're told that at the point when the enslaved peoples were about to be taken to the ships and boarded the ships, you had to walk, and we walked this ourselves. You had to walk about a mile, right? And midway through that mile walk, and of course you're wearing these heavy chains on you. I put the chain on around my neck. I don't have a picture of it, but it's extraordinarily heavy. Can't even imagine what that would have been like. And they were brought to this well where they were forced to drink the water. And it's as it goes that this well was the Yoruba tribe used some kind of tribal magic to really break the spirit of enslaved peoples, which included some Yoruba, by the way, as well, right? And to make people forget where they came from and who they were, right? Now, who's to say if it actually worked or didn't work? But at the very least, the placebo effect of being forced to drink this water, which you're told is cursed, would certainly do a lot to break your spirit and your will, right? So this was a practice that was instituted to really break the spirit of the Igbo people. And you'll see here on the right, this is the beach where the ships would have been docked. You know, they say that you have the Gold Coast along West Africa. You had the Ivory Coast, and they said that this coast, was what was called the Slave Coast, because 6 out of 10 enslaved peoples that were brought to Americas came from this coast. And so they estimate about 1.5 to 2 million at least Igbo people were enslaved and brought to the Americas. And today, a scholar who's a professor at the University of Mississippi, he says that potentially 60% of African Americans have at least one parent that has Igbo ancestry. There's a lot of Igbos that were enslaved and brought to the Americas, to the Caribbean islands, and to this island, Turtle Island. But many folks actually don't know their heritage. They don't know that they're Igbo, right? What's somewhat interesting to note is that while Igbos were being enslaved and forced to convert to Christianity, right, starting in the late 1850s, Igbos in Igbo land were also now going through their own forced conversion and fighting for their freedom, right? The Igbo elders say that the Europeans traded chattel slavery for mental slavery, right, with Christianity. And so the British came in, they start consolidating all of this land now as one country, Nigeria is what they called it, right? And so you had the forced coming together of over 250 different tribes, right? Igbo being one of the 3 main tribes. You have the Hausa, the Yoruba, and the Igbo as the primary tribes in Nigeria, right? And so all Igbos, whether you went through the transatlantic slave trade or if you were actually still on the land, everybody was subject to forced conversion from traditional Igbo practice, Igbo religion. Today, you have about 34 million Igbo that are in Nigeria, and worldwide, about 50 million altogether, including those in the diaspora, like I said, that don't even know that they are Igbo. Now, back to my family, you'll see here on the right is my grandfather and my grandmother, my Ima's parents. And on my left is my great-grandfather, right? Frank Huntley. Now, my Ima's father and grandfather, right? Her mother's father, right? So they weren't actually related themselves. So they both would talk about being Igbo while she grew up. And, she would oftentimes tell me, even though that I'd be really good at business, right? Which is fascinating because she didn't make the connection that I'd be good at business because we're Igbo. But if you go to Nigeria now, you'll have both Igbos and other people tell you that the characteristic of being Igbo is to be entrepreneurial and to be really good at business. Like it's just fascinating to put that all together, right? But that her being Igbo didn't actually fuel her return to Torah-based spirituality, to Judaism. She grew up Christian, and perhaps it's because she is Igbo that her family was so devout to a spiritual connection with the creator, right? But her being Igbo, she grew up knowing that, but it didn't mean so much to her, to my understanding, because in the 60s and 70s, without the internet, without any way to connect with Nigerians or Igbo people, it was just a factoid that was stored away of, oh, yes, I come from this people, but there was no way to make real meaning from that, right? Really, their journey to Judaism and to Torah is because of their commitment, of their spiritual knowledge, their investment, right? Both from my Ima and from my Abba, of really wanting to be in relationship with the creator, with Hashem, with Yah, and pursuing that truth no matter what. And even at the expense of letting go of how they were raised, which they ultimately did, they let go of Christianity because they came to understand that that wasn't the spiritual truth that resonated with them and actually correlated with the Torah, right? And it is interesting to note that it's around this time they started making their spiritual journey, their journey of Teshuvah in the early 90s. And this is around the time that Igbos around in Igbo land also started to make this Teshuvah. You have to remember, right, that they also went through their own forced conversion to Christianity, right? Under the pressure of the threat of violence that happened, right, under colonial rule. And so you had, after a few generations, people already kind of, they knew that they were Israelite, but even some of them started to forget. That wasn't like such knowledge that was being held on by younger generations. But in the early 90s, you had some folks who were, okay, we're Christian, we're doing the thing. Now they really doing a closer reading of the Old Testament. They say, oh, wait, hold on now. My grandfather does this. This is exactly the ancestral religion that we've been doing. What the hell is going on here? Right? And so you had people now asking questions and then saying, forget this Christianity, I'm going to return to my ancestral religion, and starting to connect the dots that actually aligns with Judaism. Right. So it's just very interesting to know that while my parents were on that spiritual journey, many in Igbo land were also on that spiritual journey of return. And it's only through the interconnectedness of the internet of the 21st century that we started to then connect our Jewishness to our Igbo ancestral connection, right? As we learned about Igbo people speaking up about their generational knowledge of being descendants of Israelites. And so with that came a reframing of spiritual practices that my Ima grew up with right after she came to know that there are Igbo people saying, oh, yes, we are ancestrally Israelite. Then that factoid that she was Igbo had so much more meaning, right? But it actually wasn't the driving point to her spiritual connection with Hashem, right? But then she started to reframe, well, why was her father so insistent that her brothers be circumcised, even though that wasn't a practice in Guyana, right? And make sure that they were circumcised. It didn't happen at 8 days. It certainly happens at 8 days in Igbo land. But because it's not a practice in Guyana, that happened later in their life, but he was insistent that it happened, right? Or the washing of the hands in the mornings, or the covering of the mirrors and portraits after somebody dies, right? So why did that happen, right? Reframe it that actually is also an Igbo practice, as well as a Jewish practice for Ashkenazi Jews, for some Ashkenazi Jews as well, which is very fascinating, right? And so, of course, that sparked a natural curiosity and desire to connect with Igbo people. And that became possible this past year as my sister, she's doing her doctoral studies through Columbia University in Lagos. And so my parents were able to visit, and they built some connections that allowed me to build off of that. And I was able to be the first in my family to go to Igbo land. They went to Lagos, but they weren't able to go east. And so I was able to build off of that and actually go to Igbo land, to the state of Anambra. So I just want to kind of bring you through the tale of being there, some of the key customs and traditions, and I'll open it up for questions. We arrived in Lagos in January with the help of Hashem, truly. We didn't even know if we were going to get a visa. And when we landed, we then took another domestic flight to the state of Anambra, which and stayed there for 5 days. We got there on a Friday morning, and we stayed in the town of Ogidi, which has 9 villages, and it's in the county of Idemili. And we were in the village of Nkwele, which honestly, as we drove, looked just like Guyana, or I should say, Guyana looks just like it. It was amazing to see the ways in which, our ancestors would have just rebuilt what they knew in the diaspora, right, of where they came from. We stayed in a local hotel, which is about 5 minutes from the synagogue and the community that was built around 2005, 2006. And this particular family in Ogidi really helped to kickstart this teshuva within their particular area. And they really welcomed us like family. It was beautiful. And we went to all of their services. We went to Kabbalat Shabbat, Shacharit, Mincha, and Kende Davin. Let me tell you, I mean, the services were soulful. Everyone was singing, praying. Even the smallest of children were belting their hearts out. I mean, it was inspiring. I hadn't experienced something quite like that here in the United States. So it was both inspiring, but also a little bit of sadness came up of like, where is that kind of commitment, right? And fervor. They daven more of a Sephardic Orthodox style with some of their own Igbo melodies, but also some melodies that I'm familiar with through Sephardic or Ashkenazic traditions. For example, like I was familiar with the melody they use for Yedid Nefesh for Kabbalat Shabbat, but they have their own melody, Igbo melody, traditional melody for Shalom Aleichem, which is beautiful. And I'm excited. I've been excited to incorporate it into my own Shabbat practice. So you'll see here in the pictures, this is the on the left, right? You'll see the picture. This is actually their the synagogue from the side, the gray building, and the yellow building is actually somebody's house, and like the synagogue is in the same compound as somebody's home. And on the right, you have the picture, the inside, and so the Aron Kodesh is towards the front. And they are an Orthodox community, so they do have a small mechitza. It was, relatively reasonable. Like you could see over it and participate. The Sidurim were also Sephardic tradition, as were the Torah scrolls. So the Torah scroll was I don't know if you've seen these, but it's a Torah scroll that stands up. It's the base is flat, and so you don't read it with this Torah scroll flat, but really upright, which was really neat. I hadn't actually experienced that before. Let's see here, and the Torah service. I'll just say. To mention, like we moved all the chairs back when we started the Torah service, and they say every Shabbat is like Simchat Torah. When we started the Torah service, we danced the Torah scroll for about 20 minutes, and it was amazing. And it was amazing to really see that level of joy with it all.
Yehudah, can I ask a question here?
Please.
So it sounds like the current practice is some mixture of ancestral traditions, and it sounds like maybe some of this sounds more recent, like some of the like the Sephardic stuff? So rabbis came over and taught, or how did that work?
Good question. So there was it's taught by Igbo people. There was an Igbo man who lived in Israel for some time, and he came back, and because yes, there was no rabbinical liturgy in Igbo land, right? That wasn't something that translated or was carried over. There was no rabbinical liturgy during the exile, so it's not something that is ancient, but it's something that's been incorporated in the last 30 or so years. And he taught a lot of folks who then went on and teach others. And so there are now at least 70 synagogues spread across Nigeria, some in Igbo land, but some in like Abuja, the capital, some in Lagos. But they all are being run by folks who are, or were started or founded by folks who are Igbo. Yeah. And, it was interesting. They're Orthodox, so it's, you need a minyan, you need 10 men, services were lengthy because of that. So we tried to make it back to Mincha, but we were tired. We didn't make it back in time, but I made it back, and it actually opened up some space because it's a really youth-led community, right? The youth really run it, those in their like 20s and 30s. And so it really opened up some space for me to connect with some of my peers and learn more about their journey. And it was interesting, like, to even discuss with some folks who have forgotten their Igbo identity because they were forced to hide themselves from other Nigerians during the Biafra genocide that killed 3 million people, right? So in the 1960s and 1970s, Igbo people tried to break off, right? As you remember, colonialism really forced this whole region into one country. And they finally fought and got their freedom in the early 1960s, right? But the Igbo people said, like, we were never a nation with all these other tribes. We want to be our own nation. Try to split off into was the land of Biafra and have that be their own country. But the other Nigerians or other people who became Nigerians didn't want that to happen. It didn't want that secession and that economic gap. So it's called the Biafra War, but it was really a genocide of about 3 million Igbo folks. And so because of that, you had some Igbo families start to say, we're not Igbo. And it just takes a couple generations now, some of their kids who speak Igbo, who all the things they themselves say, oh, I'm not Igbo, because it's so ingrained to distance themselves from being Igbo as a way of protection, right? Because they were maybe closer to the front lines of the war/genocide. So after Shabbat, I really had the opportunity to meet with various elders of the community. I met, so you see here, various elders, and, that was Sunday morning. Monday, I got to meet with the chief of Ademili, who is endowed with the power to really spiritually cleanse the land from impurities and open up spaces with blessings and prayers, and, really summarize discussions and decisions of elders. And then I met with Eze Chukwumeka Eri, who is understood to be the 34th king of the tribe of God. And I'll share more about him in a moment. But I think most important, before I open up for questions, I want to speak to the customs and traditions before I get to wrapping up with speaking about the tribe of God. The customs and the practices are very, very embodied, really connected to the land, centered around creating unity and trust. All gatherings in Igbo land begin with the breaking of the kola nut, which is not unique to Igbo people. The kola nut is used in other African communities, but the way it's used is unique, right? As a way to build unity, a blessing is set upon it, pouring of libations to Hashem in the name of the ancestors, in the way that we call on Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as a way to make way for ourselves, right, in front of Hashem. The name that they use for the creator is Chukwu, and there's no plural form. So you may, if you look up stuff about Igbo people, you may see some things about they worship other deities and stuff like that. You know, I'm sure there's some strains now over time that you have different assimilated Igbo practices. But the primary Igbo traditional religion is very much a reflection of Torah-based practice of worshiping one Elohim, one creator. They practice purification, indeed, omanana, right? Which means, I saw that pop up in the chat, which means practices that you do in the land, right? What you do in the land, which really aligns a lot with what you see in the Torah, right? You saw that the Israelites during the exile or during the exodus from Egypt, they didn't actually keep many of the chagim, many of the holidays, because those are holidays done in the land. So it wasn't until they got to the land that actually started to do a lot of the holidays, right? So amanana, the Igbo word for the traditional religion, means what's done in the land. So it's a very embodied practice, right? Like they even practice purification of the land and have an understanding that certain actions that can defile themselves will make them unfit to live in the land, and the land itself would expel them, right? I spoke a little bit about the agricultural Torah practice of Shemitah, the laws of gathering for the poor, right? Sukkot. Circumcision is a big practice that reflects connection to Torah, circumcision on the 8th day, really. You know, again, it may not agree with a lot of our modern sensibilities, but Nidah, the laws around a person's monthly menstruation, and as well the separation of a mother after birth, right? That's a big practice for them. Shabbat, it's somewhat different because of the way that they think about weeks and the market days, but there is a day of rest in their weekly cycle. And there's some linguistic connections as well, right? Like the word for, and there's a move to do more formal studies around that, but you have some scholars like Remy Alona who have done some research to really show that there is a deep linguistic connection between Igbo and Hebrew. Even you hear Igbo and Hebrew and Ivri sound very similar, right? And he argues that they're actually the same word. Hebrew, Igbo, Ivri are all the same word. And the Middle English version of Hebrew is Ebrew, which is spelled Ebreau, right? So you can see the evolution, right, of the word and how they're all quite similar. But one interesting linguistic connection is that aliyah means to go up, and in Igbo, it's just liyah, right? So you have a lot of these very interesting connections there. I want to end with just two thoughts before I open it up. So you have here that there's a real, this is the person, if you see here at the bottom of the screen, these are all of this is the Ezeora dynasty, right? Of the tribe of God. Again, in the anglicized name that you read, you might read it as Gad, right? But in the Hebrew, it'd be pronounced as God. And this person can trace his lineage all the way back to, you see here, each of the kings of the tribe of God, going back to 1087 BCE, before the Common Era, right? And so we went and we met with the current king. He does sit on a throne. We did say, long live the king, in Igbo. It was a very interesting experience to meet with this person who knows that very much so. You'll even see, so he doesn't sit on that throne on the left. That's like that was the original throne that was made, a couple, millennia ago. He's in an adjacent place. and they preserve that throne as a historical kind of record, and they don't want anyone to really touch that. But he does have an understanding, and he does know that he is a descendant of the fifth son of God, Eri. Now, even though with this understanding, he is Christian, right? And so I share all this to say that we all are, because of the legacies of colonialism and forced conversion, many of us are still in the process of teshuvah. And it's one of the things that, I think gives me a lot of groundedness and, I think pride in my parents' journey, that their motivation, so much of the Torah is about choice, about really choosing to be in relationship with Yah. And that was their drive, was their desire to be in this relationship. And it was only after they built that relationship that they learned about their ancestral roots, that's deepened that relationship, that's boiled it. But it didn't come from a place of a sense of chosenness, right? Which can, I think, breed a sense of exceptionalism and complacency, which I, and honestly saw in this person who is the king, and, respect to this person, right? But did not have a deep desire necessarily to be in relationship because of this felt sense of, well, I have this ancestral connection, right? So very, very affirming, though, that he can trace his roots all the way so far back. I don't think many people can do that. Not many Igbos can do that themselves. And not all Igbos are from the tribe of God. I mean, there's an understanding that many tribes in the chaos of exile left and took a similar route of migration down into Igbo land. But this is one of the primary pieces of evidence, if you will, of that deep ancestral connection. The last thing that I just want to share is the Obadiah Alliance. It's an alliance of Sephardic rabbis. They brought together a Beit Din in 2022, 2023. Let's go with 2022. And they shared the ruling. They ruled that the Igbos are ancestrally Jewish, without a doubt. And they examined the evidence. They studied. They looked at the historical facts and the customs and traditions and aligned that. And their ruling is that Igbos, like so many other Europeans, went through forced conversion and should be treated as such, that under the pressure of conversion, it's not to be accepted, and you have the status of remaining in the eyes of the rest of Jewry as Hebrew, as Israelite, as Jewish. And this, I think this Beit Din is just one of many steps towards, it's not that Igbo people are looking for external validation, but it is one of many steps of being acknowledged and understood, and building connections and bridges so that we can be a comprehensive Klal Yisrael, so that we can be a comprehensive peoplehood. So thank y'all for engaging with me. Definitely happy to take some questions, and looking forward to building more connections.
Good, Yasher Koach. Do you want to end the share, and then I can sort of see folks?
No problem.
Yeah, just first of all, thank you. Folks need to know. I basically asked Yehudah if I had seen in the movie the 40 Days of Tshuva that many of us watched, just a scene of you studying Torah with your parents, and I just know Yehudah's spirit. And I was like, I just wanted to know more about your lineage and your Judaism, and I had no idea that we were going to get this unbelievable introduction to Igbo heritage and history. And so I really appreciate all the work you put into it, because it's really I have learned a huge amount, and I think others have as well. So yeah, I'll start with Chaim. Got a question or a comment?
I do, Yehudah. This was amazing and inspiring. I just want to say kol hakavod. It opens up vistas that I have never had any idea of, and I'm just inspired by what you presented us today. I want to pick up on the very last slide you put up, which was, the Obadiah Alliance. So I read the article, which was referenced someplace. It was an article from The Guardian talking about the Hebrew Igbos. And that article noted that the Rabbinate of Israel declined to approve Igbos as truly being Jewish. And I wondered, how does that sit with the community, and how does that sit with you? And, what do you think might be done about that?
Thank you for the question, Chaim. Pleasure, and I appreciate you raising that. And it's something that I wanted to actually speak to as well. I think that there's a lot of politics around acceptance of this history and reality, and I think a heavy dose of racism as well. If this was to be acknowledged and accepted by the state of Israel, that would change overnight the realities of you have potentially nearly 50 million people who could connect their lineage to Judaism, right? And so I think that many people are resistant to that reality. It's not something that is exciting to them because of the politics of power and control, and again, a heavy dose of racism. So I think speaking to some folks, it is painful. It is painful. One of the matriarchs of the community, she said, going to Israel and having people say to her, "Oh, you want to claim Judaism because you're looking for a handout," basically, was deeply hurtful to her, and also just like completely illogical, given that Igbo people are already persecuted in Nigeria. So it's like, why would you want, like, Jews are also persecuted around the world. Like, you're not escaping anything by aligning yourself with Judaism, right? If that's the thing that you're trying to, and they're also not necessarily looking for that. They just want to be like anybody else seen. We just want to be seen, right? Just like anybody else.
Thank you. Yeah, Carolyn.
Just to comment, it so happens that I visited Igbo land in the late 70s, and it was a very formative experience for me. And it was it was still in the period right after the war, and somewhat devastated, but I was so struck by how warm everyone was. And people talked then about the analogy between the Igbos and the Jews as having a diaspora, having had to flee in a time of genocide, and that sort of creative, artistic, entrepreneurial spirit, so suffusing the culture. So it's kind of amazing to me to realize there could be a religious and ethnic connection as well.
Thank you. Other questions? I'll ask one, Yehudah, just if on a little more personal level, just I imagine this is very powerful on a lot of levels. And I know you as someone who's like on this constant, spiritual journey, ever deepening. I'm just thinking about all these connections. You talked about the place you're born, and then the place where your great-grandparents, however it goes back, were born, however many generations back before they were kidnapped. And yeah, I just wonder what it was like, and how that if there was a piece of your own spiritual journey that felt, I don't know, if either complete or a new door opening, or like, as you know, if you think of yourself retelling the story in 20 years or something, where will be actually being there and meeting those folks do you think, in your own personal spiritual journey?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Thanks for the comment, Caroline. I'm not sure it's Caroline or Carolyn. It was deeply similar to what you shared, Caroline. It was very formative for me and deeply grounding and empowering. I've known for some time, and we've made the connection for some time that we're Igbo, and therefore, as Igbos have been more vocal, and we have that connection and ability to learn that we're ancestrally Jewish, we've known that for some time. But to be there and to experience the customs and the traditions, and for that to come to life in such stark detail, and to meet the people who my extended family is really, really life-changing. And it was very emotional to go to the point of no return, to imagine my ancestors, walking to the ship, and what had been going through their minds in that moment, and the terror of it all. And Baruch Hashem, I just have such gratitude to Hashem for the privilege to be able to go back and piece together this piece of return. But I'm clear that it's just a piece, right? That too is a land of exile, right? And there's much more journey to go, both physically and spiritually, to make complete teshuva.
Thank you. Well, I told you we went. One other. Let me say. Oh, Lauren's asking about folks in Ghana. If there's also a Jewish, an ancestral community in Ghana that you know of. Yeah. In Ghana, the community is Sefwi. Thank you, Dr. Masayahu. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Did an interesting program with some folks from there a couple years ago. And look, I mean, I think certainly the Igbo folks are not the only Africans that have Israelite connection and lineage. And folks were spread out. It was the chaos of it. Similarly, I think, to the ways in which the migrations happened in Europe, right? And people were spread out, and Jews spread out all over, trying to find another homeland that they could be safe in.
Mm-hmm. It's making me think, right? There's a massive amount of history that's still to be done, and connections still to be made. Like, we're really, I mean, meaning we, the white folks, we in the West, we the Ashkenazim, like a lot more for us to learn in terms of the rest of our people. Yeah, Rebecca. There you
Okay.
right, there you go.
So the word Israelite is a word that they grew up with. Am I understanding that correctly? Your grandparents, like the English word Israelite?
So my grandparents grew up knowing that they were Igbo.
Okay.
The connection of Igbo and Israelite came later, when we started to learn from people in Igbo land. They understand that they are, and they held on to the ancestral knowledge that they are Israelite, right? It was only through that we made that connection.
So that all Igbos are Israelites?
Yes, exactly. And if you ask again, like I mentioned, if you ask Igbo Christians, Igbo Muslims, the sense is that folks know. Like, you ask them, who are your ancestors? Where did you come from? They'll tell you, from Israel. We're Israelites. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a motivation to necessarily be Jewish.
And how big is the Jewish community there.
So
I remember you saying.
I actually don't. I say I don't know. Like I said, the estimates that I received are there are about at least 70 synagogues at this time, spread out across Nigeria. But again, folks went through. Mostly Igbos are Christian still to this day because of the legacies of British colonialism and forced and coerced conversion, I should say, to Christianity.
I guess I have a lot of questions. Can you comment about genetic or linguistic studies about any connection?
So yes, I appreciate the doctor here. I will also put into the chat if you if you want to read the oops, let me put it to everybody here. You could check that out. If you want to read the Obadiah Alliance ruling on this, it goes into great information. Indeed, as doctor is putting into the chat, Remy Olona is a great scholar on this. He actually did a webinar today. Actually, I was like, oh, I wish I could have just sent everybody there. He did a webinar today on genocide and anti-Semitism and connection to Igbo people. As I was mentioning before, though, just to answer your questions about the linguistics, yes, there are linguistic studies happening, and there is some linguistic connection that's being made. Around the connection of DNA, Remy Olona does a lot of work around DNA. One of the things that he has pointed out, though, is that, I think over the years, there's been a lot of kind of research and stuff around like European Jewry DNA, and there be kind of like a Levitical particular DNA piece. They have found, though, that many people who are not Jewish also hold that piece of DNA. So there's some scholarship that's around like, it's not very clear if there's any kind of strand of DNA that says you're Jewish or you're not Jewish, or you're Israelite or you're not Israelite, right? But there is DNA that can point you where your ancestors came from, which Remy Alona's at the very least does point to the Levant and to the Middle East, even though his family has certainly been in Igbo land for 1,000 years. So definitely invite you to check out his scholarship and about his ruling.
Thank you. All right, Yehudah, I said I wouldn't keep you too much past an hour, so let's. I think we will wrap up. Really, thank you again for really just profound gratitude for sharing so much of yourself and your trip and your research with us. And to be continued. Any final words you want to leave us with?
Be in touch. If you are, like I said, this is I shared not from a place of trying to convince, but from a place of ambassadorship to facilitate connections with those who are ready to help build community. And there are many resources that are needed with Igbo Jews, from Cedar Ream to Torah Scrolls to schools for education to build the Jewish knowledge. So you please share my contact information, Rabbi Tova, if that's possible with folks, and be in touch.
Is any of that support for the community happening through Kulanu? Do you know? Because I know they do a lot of that kind of work.
They do, but I think there's enough need to go around that there can be kind of parallel efforts.
But no, I'm just asking who's like, is there a group organizing? That is all I'm asking. If we were interested in that.
Yes, you can check out Kulanu, but also I am.
You're doing it yourself? Okay.
Yes.
Keep it off going and putting more work on your plate, but okay, I'm hearing you.
You got it.
Thank you so much. All right, really, well, thank you so much. All right, good night, everyone. Have a fun State of the Union or whatever you're going to do the rest of the evening.